Almost immediately after the autumn equinox, the word goes out and people begin to gather. Ships first, at ports all along the Bay of Catazar, from Siroc and Shantarim in the west to Crown's Quay in Viston in the east. Then, over the next few weeks, soldiers and warriors flood into the coastal towns ready to take the fight to the Grendel. From across the entire empire they come, soldiers and ships alike. Every imperial nation is represented, from the Brass Coast to Verushka, from Urizen to Wintermark. Only in Sarvos is it business as usual. With the armada anchored within sight of the docks, it is deemed wiser not to draw too much attention to the gathering storm. The Senate has paid the ransom demanded by the Salt Lords, and their vast fleet of warships simply idle in the waters off the jewelled city. Yet many of the ships leaving Sarvos hug the coast, joining the fleets being gathered at other ports along the Bay of Catazar. It takes time, of course, to gather a great fleet. Just shy of 250 fleet captains answered the call to take the fight to the Grendel. Their ships needed to ensure berths for the thousands of soldiers flooding south to join the bold endeavour. The civil service does what it can, but even their traditionally efficient bureaucracy is tasked near to the limit. Arranging for over 300 individual warbands to find ships capable of transporting them to the far side of the Bay of Catazar is a Herculean task, but with the enthusiastic aid of port officials across the Southern Empire, it is managed in little over a month. One consideration that makes the entire process more difficult is the sheer amount of magic that has been brought to bear. Hundreds of soldiers enchanted with spring magic that not only grants them increased vigour and savage strength, but also heightens their aggression. Remaining patient in the face of weeks-long delays as the full force of the Armada gathers is more than some soldiers can take. Violence erupts more than once between soldiers filled with unaccustomed levels of potent sorcery, keeping the peace between gangs of armed and armoured soldiers, their bloodlust heightened by the touch of spring, is a challenge that tasks the resources of militia, magistrates, and the local peacekeeping forces. Not that the soldiers are the only problem. Many of the ship's crews themselves are girded with enchantments of spring that exacerbate their own frustration at having to wait for warriors to be ready before they can unleash their fury against the Grendel. The situation is made even more tense where Imperial orcs have received these boons. The magic kindles each orc's natural instincts to seek out battle and conflict, in some cases to dangerous levels. Some of the coastal towns become nervous powder kegs, waiting for a single flame in the wrong place to cause them to explode, well before they reach Grendel territory. In contrast, those ships graced with the power of night magic become eerie oases of calm. Yet even this magic is not without drawbacks. The presence of so many warbands enshrouded in mist and shadow inadvertently helps to deliver one of the dampest, most dismal autumns in recent imperial history. Banks of thick fog hang over the docks of the Southern Empire, and in some places bring unsettling dreams to haunt the citizens' sleep. Not all the soldiers who come to aid the attack on Dubhtraig are mortal. Alongside the humans and orcs, stranger figures are spotted. From Navarre, Highguard, Verushka and Urizen come preternatural warriors of living shadow. Some are armed with wicked polearms of black wood and unfamiliar metal, wearing dark heavy robes embroidered with richly coloured mystic symbols over scaled armour. Some are wrapped in pale yellow furs and glide soundlessly through the twilight, with massive double-handed golden axes over their shoulders. Despite their exotic nature, they are adept at fading into the background, and there are several humorous incidents where inebriated sailors discover to their surprise that they are being observed with interest by a dozen heavily armed, coal-skinned warriors. At the other end of the scale come half a dozen coteries of living crystal soldiers, raised by their magician captains from Manasites in Urizen and the League. Beautiful, multifaceted creatures wielding long spears, and clad in gemstone armour that closely echoes the style of the nation where they were created. They remain aloof from the hustle and bustle of the docks. Indeed, those who interact with them find that they are nonplussed by the excitement, confused by the barely ordered chaos that surrounds them. They're polite enough, but to the surprise of many, seem a little out of their depth, hungry for a level of discipline that simply does not exist in the scrabble to prepare for the raid against the Grendel. Perhaps the strangest magical warriors are found on certain highborn ships flying the black and maroon torch banners of Jashin's legacy. At the prow of each ship stands a great beast. Bears, rams, and bulls of red stone wreathed in an ever-burning aura of flame. Each night they serve as silent, living beacons like great mobile lighthouses on the docks of Sanctuary Sands. Many sailors are deeply concerned about their presence. Barrels of additional sand and water are loaded onto the vessels they travel on, but this does not prevent several small fires breaking out on the Necropolis quayside in their vicinity. Truly, we live in an age of wonders. Finally, a little over 6 weeks after the autumn equinox, the word goes out. It sweeps from one end of the bay to the other, and in the course of 5 days and nights, carried by Navarre runners, by feathered messengers, by pulsing beacons, it is time to set sail. The target of the raid will be the great Grendel city of Dubhtraig itself, throne of the Salt Lord Suriad. Once the order is given, the difficulty of actually coordinating the attack begins to increase exponentially. For the most part, Imperial vessels travel together. Not every unit of soldiers is prepared for the reality of travelling across the turbulent sea of the Bay of Catazar. For every band of freeborn Corsair Marines, there are a dozen warriors who have never really set foot on the deck of a sailing ship before. By their nature, some ships are faster and more manoeuvrable than others. Some pull ahead, whilst others fall behind. This is not a disciplined navy, but an armada of hundreds of individual vessels. Communication is very difficult indeed, especially as the ships hail from ports across the southern coast of the Empire. Yet, the captains are experienced enough to account for these obstacles. Once night falls, lanterns are used to send messages using the Urizon Heliopticon cipher from ship to ship. Civil service observers, assigned to every Imperial vessel by the Senate several years ago, help immeasurably in this regard. For that matter, a navy could never hope to brave the waters at the heart of the bay, out of sight of land, could not hope to cross the trackless, watery wastes while maintaining any sense of cohesion. For the fleets of the Imperial captains, however, this is simply business as usual. Now the ships are moving, the first engagements begin to take place. Individual Orc pirates encounter Imperial fleets, invariably to the detriment of the Grendel. Those ships that are not destroyed or captured are forced to flee. But here the scattered nature of the Empire's strategy is in their favour. Grendel sailors are used to engaging Imperial fleets in the wide waters of the bay. They have little reason to believe there's anything more going on than the usual dance of captain against captain. If some wonder at the strange flags or the presence of Marines aboard the vessels that they do see, well, what will they report? That the Empire is taking steps to protect its ships? Then the first ships begin to reach the coast of Tathar. Fort Salan in the west and Fort Fuil in the east provide a measure of protection to the settlements that cluster around them. But beyond their immediate shadow, the Empire's ships and warriors are able to launch lightning-fast attacks against the ports and trading ships alike, with relative impunity. Some Imperial soldiers go ashore and press inland a little, arranging to rendezvous with their transport later. They draw the attention of the Orc garrisons at the twin forts inland, away from the sea, engaging in a brief campaign of guerrilla warfare against the people of the Broken Shore. They rarely stay in one place for long. They raid villages, burn supplies, loot mines, and free slaves. Those shielded by the shifting shrouds of night magic are particularly adept at striking without warning,
whilst those infused with the fury of spring devastate any who dare to try and stand against them. Chaos spreads. As more and more ships reach the shore, as more and more troops disembark, the Grendel belatedly begin to realise the scale of the attack. The Empire begins to encounter stiff resistance, while the armies of the Broken Shore are elsewhere, while their navy sits complacently in the waters south of Savos. The orc tribes of Tathar are not slow to take up arms against these unexpected invaders. They are orcs, after all, and orcs revel in violence and confrontation. A fleet of Dornish and Winterfolk ships attack the vessels that transport weirwood from the forested isle of Balsagoth to Dubhtraig, which are burnt and scuttled. But the warships that patrol the island are able, just, to prevent any sizable landing force getting a foothold on the island itself. League privateers and freeborn corsairs throw up a blockade between the islands of Dubhtraig, plundering any orc ship that tries to reach, or flee, the Grendel city. Within a week, the Empire dominates the waters along the coast of Tathar. No Grendel ship can move between the ports along the northern Broken Shore. No doubt calls for aid are issued, but the other Salt Lords are slow to respond. Contributing to the chaos is the fact that a significant number of the ships raiding Dubhtraig are marked with summer magic, and touched by the hand of the Eternal Rhiannos, the regent of the Eternal Sea. The magic warps the skein of fate to ensure that the enchanted ships encounter obstacles they might otherwise have missed. They, and the soldiers that they carry, find themselves blown off course, trapped in mats of predatory seaweed, attacked by griffins or sea-going drakes, encountering rafts of escaped slaves with tempting stories of rich estates on secluded islands. The opportunities for excitement, wealth and disaster are impossible to avoid and difficult for the enchanted crews to ignore. It is a fine balance between disorder and strategy, between the will of the individual champions and the ultimate ambitious goal of raiding the seat of Salt Lord Suriad. Everything relies on the timing of the final raid. Strike too quickly, and insufficient strength will be brought to bear. Wait too long, and with each passing day the risk grows that the Grendel might be able to move warships or armies into position to defend Dubhtraig. With the Empire's full force finally gathered, the last ships in position, those captains who have taken the war to the Grendel on land marching overland from the east and west towards the outskirts of Dubhtraig, the final moment of the campaign begins. As the sun rises on the appointed day, the Grendel lords of Dubhtraig are made finally horribly aware that this is not simply a raid against the coast, that the city itself is the Empire's goal. Imperial soldiers, among them a significant contingent of Navarre and Varushkans, seize the towers that guard the approach to the sprawling docklands. With the arrowed towers neutralized, the Imperial Armada drives down into the heart of the city. A savage strike aimed at the shipyards, where the Grendel lovingly raise and tend to their fleet of warships. Dubhtraig is not undefended, of course. Dozens of Grendel privateers and traders raise their sails and come to face the Imperials in the waters of the bay. Ships on both sides are damaged, sunk to the bottom. Fire spreads across the waters. Blood turns the waters of the cove pale crimson. As the day wears on, terrible sharks, maddened by the scent of blood, are lured into the waters of Dubhtraig, frenziedly attacking any human or orc who falls into the water. Not every ship on the sprawling docks of Dubhtraig belongs to an orc, however. There are merchant vessels here, flying the flags of the Asavean archipelago, of the principalities of Yarm, of the Sarkophan Delves, and even a few from the citadels of Axos. There is panic among these human traders. They loudly proclaim their neutrality in this conflict, pointing to the fact that the Empire is not at war with them to secure their ships, their crews, and their cargoes. Where possible, their vessels are left alone. Inevitably, there are a few unfortunate incidents in the bloody fog of war, but for the most part, the vessels belonging to foreign nations are spared. Disciplined marcher and highborn soldiers capture and hold a portion of the western docks, providing essential cover to allow more troops to disembark, but also to allow ships to take on the slaves liberated from the domination of the Grendel. Those slaves who realise that the Empire represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for freedom take the chance to turn on their masters and make their own way to the docks if they can. Dozens of desperate humans and orcs fight their way to freedom, in some cases joining the fighting alongside the raiders. The great numbers of Imperial Orc warbands prove particularly effective at rallying their enslaved cousins to their banners, while others flock to the freeborn vessels, eager to escape lives of endless brutality and cruel suffering. The fighting begins on the quaysides, then spills into the narrow streets of the city proper. Unsurprisingly, the League excels here. These bravos raised on hundreds of brawls in the alleys of Tassato and Savos, on the walls of Holberg, in the back streets of Temeshwar, use the terrain to their advantage, engaging in close-quarters fighting and daring smash-and-grab raids against the wealth of the Grendel. And everywhere through the fray there are Urizen, wielding their strength with preternatural calm, striking with the relentless surgical precision where they can to best turn the tide of a fight, then moving quickly to a new location. Sentinels and battle mages bring succour to the injured, help to free warbands that have been pinned down, guide stragglers back to their alleys, and direct the terrified slaves to the safety of the docks. Dubhtraig is a city of wealth and poverty, where hovels cluster against the walls of garishly decorated palaces. Vicious fighting spreads through the urban landscape as the nobles and the lower classes alike seek to defend what they have from the imperial assailants. Rich estate after rich estate falls to the Empire's soldiers. Orc lords and ladies sent fleeing to the great walled palace of Salt Lord Suriad. A legion of disciplined purple and gold-clad orc warriors defend the walls of the palace, holding it against all imperial attackers. The walls seem impenetrable. And then the first of the enchanted beasts conjured by the Highborn arrive. 3 great burning bulls, a pair of massive rams, and a single behemoth bear roar across the docks one after the other, unleashing their devastating power. The walls weather the first 3 strikes, and then one of the towers begins to crumble. Then, as the final great burning oxen strikes the weirwood gates, with a terrible rumbling moan, the gatehouse of Lady Suriad's sanctuary collapses, allowing Imperial soldiers, led by a triumphantly bellowing vanguard of heavily armoured Dornish knights and Wintermark warriors, to pour through the breach into the heart of the Salt Lord's court. The explosions also serve to set fire to the shambolic shantytown that sprawls beneath the towers of the Salt Lord. The flames leap joyfully between the pitch and tar-soaked wooden buildings, meeting another fire coming in the opposite direction. History will probably never know who fired the shipyards. Perhaps it was a vengeful freeborn corsair. The memory of the destruction of the storm and the burning of Atalia. Perhaps it was a Sarvosan, cold fury burning in their heart as they recalled the occupation of their home. Perhaps it was an Urizen veteran of the invasion of Spiral, methodically anointing another warehouse with oil before expertly hurling a burning brand through the door. Perhaps it was just an accident, a lantern knocked over in the wrong place as the fighting spread. Regardless of how it started, the fires surrounding Suriad's palace are soon dwarfed by the conflagration that begins to spread across the docks. Some of the Grendel break off and fight against the Imperial invaders, desperate to stop the fire consuming their beloved shipyard. At the same time that the main force is attacking the city proper, a secondary force strikes south of the city into the mines that are the source of so much of Dubhtraig's wealth. They smash the defences in short order, slaughter the guards, and begin to break chains, and help themselves to the precious metals, the pure salt, the mithril. They do not have long. This part of the raid is perhaps the riskiest element of the entire plan. The fighting is brutal. Imperial Orc Reavers and the Varushkan Wagon Raiders in particular are adept at fighting in the close confines of underground tunnels and galleries. And here, more than the rest of the city, They receive the aid of the slaves that the Grendel have chained in the dark. As the sun begins to sink into the west, the crimson sky echoing the scarlet waters of the bay, the rivulets of blood that run through the streets, the horns begin to blow, drums beat, sounding the withdrawal. Some warbands make an orderly retreat to the docks, whilst others break into a ramshackle charge for the edges of the city, burdened down with sacks of loot and stolen art treasures. Dour marchers and grim-faced highborn are the last to leave, a cordon of steel around the western docks ensuring that no Imperial is left behind that can be saved, helping the last few desperate slaves find a place on the dock of an Imperial ship heading north. A great black cloud of smoke hangs low over Dubhtraig as the Imperial Armada retreats from the city. The shipyard still stands, but more than half of it has been gutted with fire. Salt Lord Suriad's palace is in ruins, flames lapping at its minarets and its towers, and the rumour begins to spread that the lady herself has fallen in battle with the Imperials. A fifth of the city is on fire. Over the next week, Imperial forces withdraw from Tathar. Those captains who fought a guerrilla war against the Grendel on land reach their rendezvous points and embark onto waiting vessels. In almost every case, they are accompanied by freed slaves liberated from mines and fields. Exhausted and desperate, they huddle on the decks and in the holds as the Imperial ships arrow through the waters northwards. Some ships remain behind to harry the vessels of the other Salt Lords, belatedly coming to the aid of Lady Suriad. A few, blown astray by summer magic, are unaccounted for. The rest reach Imperial ports with perhaps 3 weeks to spare before the winter solstice. Treasures are unloaded, the injured are tended to, the fallen are honoured, damaged ships raised into dry dock. As the scale of success becomes clearer, a wave of triumph washes from one side of the southern coast to the other. There is still the question of what to do with the slaves, of course. In total, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 slaves managed to reach an Imperial ship. Perhaps a third of that number came from Dubhtraig itself, household slaves, dock workers, and the like. The remainder were freed from the mines or from the villages during guerrilla raids. Whilst perhaps 200 are humans, many of them have never been Imperial citizens, and the remainder are all orcs. The civil service is already drawing up some proposals as to how to deal with them. For now, they are bedded down in makeshift tent villages, on the floors of churches and in empty warehouses, wherever there's space. Excited observers on the docks of Savos, those who've been keeping their spyglasses on the Grendel Armada, are able to spot the very moment that the news of attack reaches the commanders of the Orc navies. They mark the confusion that spreads, and with some trepidation, the sudden raising of sails, the movement of ships, recognizing with sudden horror that these are the signs of an imminent counterattack. Yet, after a few tense minutes, the flurry of activity subsides. A handful of swift vessels peel off from the main armada, arrowing swiftly southward, and then nothing. The forest of red and yellow and gold and blue sails remains off the coast of Savos, but it seems that whatever else has happened, the Grendel admirals will abide by the agreement they made with the Empire. For now, at least. Game information. To achieve the best outcome, the raid against the Dubhtraig required an effective fleet strength of 20,000, supported by military units with an effective strength of 30,000. In the end, the Empire brought to bear almost 37,000 force of fleets and just shy of 40,000 force of military units. Each fleet and military unit receives the normal production for a privateering or paid work action, plus an additional 132 rings representing booty, treasure, and art objects taken from the Grendel. In addition, the Imperial Fleetmaster receives 10 wains of weirwood and 30 wains of mithril captured from the Isle of Balsagoth and the city of Dubhtraig. The city itself is badly damaged. The grand shipyard and the docks alike were on fire when the Imperial Armada withdrew. Even if they have not both been destroyed, they will require significant repair, which will likely require large amounts of weirwood, of which the Grendel are known to have a limited supply. The Grendel will not be able to commission another navy at Dubhtraig for at least a year. Furthermore, any plans the Southern Orcs may have had to raise a new army will be delayed for at least a year as the other Salt Lords look first to the defence of their own strongholds. Finally, the garrisons of Fort Fwil and Fort Salan have been seriously impacted by the raid. The structures themselves are undamaged, but the soldiers and ships associated with the two fortifications have both seen significant losses that will need replacing before those castles can operate at full strength, placing a further drain on the coffers of the Salt Lords.